In the fall of 1992, blue turtles washed up on the shores of Alaska, a truly bizarre event as turtles have never been found to live in Alaska. And are blue turtles even a thing? What's more, alongside them came red beavers. Now, those definitely don't exist in nature. All of this happened because 12 shipping containers were swept into the ocean by a storm. One of them was packed with tens of thousands of plastic toys, ducks, turtles, frogs, a vibrant plastic fleet that, after drifting for months, beached on Alaskan shores. By the 2000s, they had reached Hawaii, the UK, and even Australia. Talk about well-traveled toys. Funny, perhaps, but there's something far more terrifying in the Pacific Ocean. A mass of debris covering 600,000 square miles, about the size of Alaska itself. This is the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, made up of countless tiny plastic particles whose total mass runs into tens or even hundreds of thousands of tons. Sure, some of this debris comes directly from ships, like those toy ducks and Lego pieces, but most of it originates from land-based waste, our everyday trash. Now, you might be thinking, well, if I throw my Pepsi bottle into the trash can, that's fine. It certainly won't end up as part of that gigantic plastic monster in the ocean. Well, not exactly. Even that bottle might one day end up floating in the middle of the ocean. But how? Because the journey of garbage is far more complex than you might imagine. Today, you will learn how your trash can come back to you as a toy. How can your laptop be powered by garbage? What's worse for the climate, cars or rotting waste? And is it true that there's gold buried in landfills? Answers to these and many more questions are in today's video. How landfills are built. Take a look at Monte Testaccio, a hill in the southwestern part of Rome. But in reality, it's not a natural hill at all. It's an enormous mound of broken ancient Roman pottery, made up of fragments from 50 million amphorae. Monte Testaccio is one of the largest landfills of the ancient world. It stands 115 feet high, about the size of a 9-story building, and spans around 5 acres, nearly 3 football fields, a true gold mine for archaeologists. But of course, the first garbage appeared long before ancient Rome, even before the first humans. When a monkey eats a banana and tosses the peel, that's waste too, isn't it? And that's pretty much what garbage looked like in prehistoric times: organic or mineral matter. Our ancestors tossed it wherever they happened to be, and nature, scavengers, or the soil itself eventually reclaimed it. At some point, people began piling waste on the edges of settlements so it wouldn't get in the way. Nomadic tribes had an even simpler solution. When garbage piled up, they simply moved to a new spot. Once the first civilizations and cities appeared, the volume of waste grew. Organic scraps were joined by textiles, metal, pottery, and construction debris, and so came the need to dispose of it. Here's how waste management evolved over time. Ancient Egypt, around 2000 BC. The first steps toward organized waste disposal were taken. Metals were melted down and reused, and organic waste was applied in agriculture. Ancient Greece, around 500 BC. By this time, the Greeks were also recycling waste. Broken pottery was repurposed as building material, and laws required citizens to dump trash outside the city walls. In a way, the Greeks were the first to legislate waste management. Ancient Rome, 1st century AD. Rome advanced even further. It was the world's first metropolis, with a population of around 1 million residents. Street cleaning was, in a sense, automated, thanks to Cloaca Maxima, the first major sewer system in history. Rainwater washed refuse from the streets into it, and it emptied into the Tiber River. Larger solid debris wasn't left behind either. It was used in construction. Most importantly, in Rome, waste became a business. Emperor Vespasian introduced paid public toilets and used the revenue to fund waste removal. This gave rise to the famous phrase, pecunia non olet, money doesn't stink. Glass and metal waste became valuable commodities too. Rag and bone dealers roamed the streets buying it for recycling. But the successful examples of Greece and Rome were soon forgotten. Europe, 15th through 16th centuries. In much of Europe, trash was simply thrown out the window. Cities teemed with filth. Rats ran rampant. The Thames and the Seine resembled open sewers. And Venice became one giant cesspool. Unsurprisingly, such unsanitary conditions led to devastating consequences. Waves of plague swept through European cities, killing off 20 to 25% of the population by conservative estimates. This dismal situation persisted for centuries, but things began to improve by the 19th century. England, 1874. The world's first waste incineration plant opens in Nottingham. France, 1884. In Paris, city officials began using a brilliant waste disposal invention by civil servant Eugène Poubelle. Do you know what it was? A trash can. It took humanity several centuries of filth and unsanitary conditions to arrive at the simplest idea, that trash could be placed in designated containers instead of being tossed onto the street. And what about the United States? 1885. The first garbage incineration plant opens in New York City. By 1914, the number of such facilities in North America had exceeded 300, primarily concentrated in large cities of the Northeast. So, in a way, trash moved from the streets to the air. People were no longer walking through it, they were breathing it. But in many parts of the US, waste management still somehow resembled ancient Greece. Garbage was collected, hauled out of town, and dumped into enormous piles. Only now, the sheer volume of trash was orders of magnitude greater. These mountains of refuse continued to grow, polluting the surrounding environment, and their stench traveled for miles. 1937, the first sanitary landfills began to appear. Waste was now compacted into layers and covered with soil, creating a kind of trash lasagna. For the next 3 decades, states and municipalities set their own landfill regulations. Then everything began to change. 1965 to 1991, the US passed a series of solid waste management laws. The Environmental Protection Agency was established. The first disposal standards, classifications, and hazard levels were introduced. But most importantly, strict criteria for municipal solid waste landfills were enacted. From that point on, landfills stopped being just massive heaps of garbage. They became engineered structures. We'll explore exactly how they're built and what they're made of a bit later. But for now, let's get back to that Pepsi bottle you threw away and follow its virtual journey from the bin to some very different destinations. So, you toss your plastic Pepsi bottle into a trash bin. That's the end of your interaction with the garbage. But for the bottle, the journey is just beginning. It sits in the bin as layer upon layer of new garbage pile up on top of it. The bin gradually fills up. Then, all that waste lying in the bin is dumped into the garbage truck. Somewhere in that pile is also your little Pepsi bottle. If it's a large container, the garbage truck can lift it using mechanical arms. So, how does this process work in American cities? Let's take New York as an example. Waste collection here is managed by the New York City Department of Sanitation. They operate over 2,000 garbage trucks. 2,000 trucks hit the streets daily to collect all the trash left over from the previous day. And that amounts to over 24 million pounds. That's roughly the weight of 50 Boeing 747s of the latest model. Just imagine New Yorkers throw away the equivalent of 50 airplanes worth of garbage every day. And across the entire United States, the number rises to 800,000 tons a day, about the same as 8 Gerald Ford-class aircraft carriers. But where does all this trash go? In the morning, as the entire city wakes up and heads to work, garbage trucks are already arriving at dozens of transfer stations scattered throughout the city. Each truck unloads its contents into a reception bunker or onto a tipping floor with a sloped surface. From here, the fate of the garbage, including your Pepsi bottle, will follow one of 3 paths: recycling, export abroad, landfilling in the US. The first path is, of course, the most environmentally friendly one: metal, paper, plastic, and glass. If your city has a waste separation system, then your empty Pepsi bottle should have been tossed into the color-coded recycling bin. This means it would be sent to a materials recovery facility. MRFs first appeared in the US in the early 1970s, and today there are over 300 of them in the country. In New York City, for example, recyclable materials go to Sims Municipal Recycling in Brooklyn. The sorting process at an MRF starts much like it does at a transfer station. Step 1. The recyclables are tipped onto the floor and then moved onto conveyor belts. Step 2. Workers step in and remove anything that's not suitable for recycling. What kind of materials are considered unsuitable? Let's say you ordered a pizza yesterday and tossed the greasy box into the blue recycling bin. Its contents is sent to the MRF. But because the box is stained with oil, cheese, and tomato sauce, the cardboard is now unfit for recycling. It's pulled off the conveyor and sent either to a landfill or a waste-to-energy incinerator. The same applies to yogurt or ice cream containers, and potentially to your Pepsi bottle. Although it's made of recyclable plastic, leftover liquid or food residue can contaminate the materials. That's why it's best to rinse containers before recycling them, or else dispose of them in the regular trash can. Yes, it might sound odd, but waste has to be clean in order to be recycled. Otherwise, it just ends up in a landfill. At this first sorting stage, MRF workers also remove hazardous items, for example, aerosol cans or batteries, which can easily cause fires. They also pull out items like plastic bags and hoses, which often get tangled in the sorting machines. Step 3. The rest of the trash goes into a large disc screen. These rotating discs separate long and flat items like cardboard from small but bulky objects like bottles. If your pizza box and Pepsi bottle had been clean and reached this point, the box would glide across the disc screen, while the bottle would fall between the rollers. Step 4. Once items are separated into the 2 groups based on their shape and size, the smaller items that drop through the rollers are sorted further. Being light, paper and cardboard are separated with air jets. Items from metals are removed with magnets. Aluminum cans and non-ferrous metals are separated using eddy current generators, machines with rapidly spinning magnetic drums. They create alternating magnetic fields that induce currents in the metal and repel them away from the stream. Glass is crushed. The only thing left now is plastic. It must be sorted by polymer type, which is done using optical infrared sensors. In recent years, AI camera systems have begun reading recycling code numbers on plastic packaging. Step 5. The sorted materials are sent off to reprocessing facilities. Everything that can't be recycled is either sent to landfills or to waste-to-energy incinerators. About 11.8% of US trash ends up at such facilities, where heat from waste is converted into electricity and heating, a process known as combustion with energy recovery. As you can see, waste sorting is a complex engineering operation involving mechanics, electrical engineering, and now even artificial intelligence. But here's an important point. The part of waste that gets recycled in the US is relatively low, only around 24 to 32%. To put this into perspective, Germany recycles 66 to 68% of its waste. And in Sweden, a staggering 99% of waste is either recycled or burned with energy recovery, meaning the heat generated during incineration doesn't just escape into the air, but is used to heat homes or generate electricity. In fact, Sweden even imports waste from neighboring countries just to keep its recycling and energy plants running. Why has the US struggled to hit those figures? To be fair, some places have come close, while the 99% mark hasn't yet been reached. San Francisco now recycles over 80% of its waste. Still, the ambitious zero waste goal that California cities set for themselves 25 years ago remains unmet. The main reason is that America is too diverse. Before the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act was passed in 1976, each state and municipality determined its own waste management policies. Only after the act did a unified federal framework come into play. But the same issue persists with zero waste. Unlike countries like Germany or Sweden, the US still lacks a systemic approach to waste sorting and recycling. Local governments continue to set their own rules. At first glance, this might not seem like a serious problem. After all, many issues are handled at the local level. But effective recycling isn't just about the moment trash moves from your bin to the container. It relates to the entire chain, starting with how products are manufactured. Federal standards are needed, not only for waste disposal, but also, for example, for product packaging. Because the issue isn't only that dirty, non-recyclable packaging ends up at MRFs, it's also that producers themselves are rarely motivated to switch to more eco-friendly packaging. Until there's a system-wide approach to waste, from manufacturer to consumer, zero waste will remain out of reach, even for cities like San Francisco. And so, another portion of waste continues to be loaded into rail cars and barges. And that's where our little Pepsi bottle might end up, heading off down the second path: export. While Sweden imports trash to fuel its recycling plants, the US exports it. And no, it's not headed to Sweden. So, how exactly does this process work? Every day, countless container ships arrive at both coasts of the United States. They bring smartphones and laptops, clothing, footwear, toys, and office supplies, essentially most of what we buy in stores. These goods are unloaded and distributed across states and cities. Meanwhile, the ships that brought them get ready to return for a new batch of products for the American market. But they don't leave empty. In exchange for imported goods, the US sends garbage back to Asian countries. Yes, on those very same ships. For example, up until 2017, nearly 70% of America's plastic waste was exported to China. So that Pepsi bottle you threw away 10 years ago, it may have ended up on the opposite side of the globe. But why would China want America's trash? Because US waste contained plenty of recyclable materials: plastics, paper, and metals. Essentially, the country was getting raw materials almost for free. These materials were then used to manufacture packaging, clothing, toys, and even electronics. But in 2018, China implemented its national sword policy, banning the import of most waste, especially dirty or unsorted garbage. Despite that, the overall situation hasn't changed much. American waste is still being exported, but now it goes to different destinations. Today, US plastic waste is sent to Malaysia, Vietnam, Thailand, Indonesia, and other countries in Southeast Asia. So now that same discarded Pepsi bottle might end up somewhere on Phuket. Meanwhile, batteries rejected by US recycling plants are often shipped to neighboring Canada or Mexico. In fact, in Mexico, this phenomenon even has its own name: waste colonialism. Remember the Great Pacific Garbage Patch we talked about earlier? You might have wondered how a Pepsi bottle you responsibly tossed into the recycling bin could end up there. Here's how. Exported waste usually goes to regions where environmental oversight is minimal. Your Pepsi bottle shipped to South Asia can easily end up floating in the Philippine Sea. And from there, its remnants might make their way into the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. That's how a single piece of plastic can travel nearly all the way around the globe, only to finish its journey in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, 1,000 kilometers off the coast of California, where it began its journey. Most of the trash, however, stays within the country and is sent to local landfills. What happens to garbage that is destined to remain in the US forever? Before it reaches a landfill, the waste is compacted. At the transfer station, a giant loader bucket drops it onto a conveyor belt, which feeds the trash into a powerful compactor. As a result, a mountain of waste is pressed into a steel container holding about 1,000 cubic feet of trash. That's roughly the size of 1.5 to 2 garbage trucks. But since it's now tightly compressed, the amount of waste inside is several times greater. And yes, your Pepsi bottle might be in there too. This load of waste now makes its final journey across states, heading toward its last resting place at one of America's landfills. For example, from New York City, it may be shipped to Pennsylvania, Ohio, or Virginia. Time to find out how these landfills are actually built, because modern landfills have nothing in common with the massive trash heaps that used to exist 100 years ago. Let's return to our Pepsi bottle's travels. Suppose it wasn't recycled or exported to the shores of Indonesia. That means its final destination is one of the 2,600 landfills across the US. These sites are typically located far from cities and bodies of water, in areas without earthquake or flood risk, so that natural disasters cannot breach the landfill and carry debris into rivers or lakes. Modern landfills are built in multiple layers. Remember the term trash lasagna? Well, your Pepsi bottle is about to become part of its filling. Let's imagine its arrival at the landfill. But this isn't just one huge pit, as you might expect. Modern landfills are made up of several individual pits, or cells. First, one cell is filled. Once it's full, the process moves on to the next. So, what does a landfill look like? At ReYOUniverse Labs, we recreated a miniature model of a landfill to show you how it all works. If building foundations are made of reinforced concrete, then the foundation of a modern landfill consists of clay and plastic. A layer of dense clay with low permeability forms a waterproof barrier that prevents trash from contaminating the soil and groundwater. This creates a kind of membrane called a liner system. Next comes the drainage system, which protects against contamination. When rain enters an open cell and filters through the layers of garbage, it creates a toxic cocktail known as leachate. To keep it from seeping into groundwater, a network of pipes is installed at the bottom of the landfill, which collects the leachate and sends it to treatment facilities. Next, the pipes are covered with geotextile. A layer of gravel is then placed on top, which allows water to flow freely toward the pipes. The gravel is again covered with geotextile to prevent small pieces of waste from getting inside. After that, we cover the structure with soil. The landfill cell is now complete and ready for use. Here is where we dump the waste, including our Pepsi bottle. But it won't stay in that form for long. A bulldozer drives over the waste to spread and compact it evenly. It will sit there for the rest of the day. And at night, all the day's accumulated trash is covered with a layer of soil. This prevents the waste from being scattered by the wind or dragged away by rats or seagulls. The next day brings another layer of trash, which is then compacted and covered with soil. Day after day, this builds multi-layered sandwiches of waste and soil. Occasionally, intermediate covers made of soil, sand, or synthetic materials are added between the layers. These are used when that section of the landfill won't be filled for several weeks. Think that's the end of it? There's one more, perhaps the biggest threat besides solid waste and toxic leachate: landfill gas. This gas is made up of carbon dioxide and methane, released during the decomposition of organic waste. To prevent its buildup, modern landfills are equipped with gas collection pipes. and the concentration of methane is constantly monitored by sensors and probes, even after a landfill is closed. Once a cell is full, it's sealed off using the same clay and plastic liner used in the base. Now it's isolated not just from below, but from above as well. And here it is, our own small landfill. From the outside, it looks like just a pile of soil with trash. But now we know that inside it hides some complex systems. And they are vital, because it's not just about the environment, but also about safety. You probably already know that CO2 is a major contributor to the greenhouse effect and global warming. But methane, CH4, is also a greenhouse gas, and it's 28 times more potent at trapping heat in the atmosphere. What's more, landfills are the third largest source of methane emissions in the US, equivalent to the annual greenhouse gas output of 24 million cars. Furthermore, methane is explosive. It's the reason some landfills catch fire. We're not talking about open flames that can be easily put out with water, but about long-lasting underground smoldering. Somewhere deep in our layered trash lasagna, bacteria break down organic matter, releasing methane. It accumulates, and due to its thermal properties, the heat starts to build up. Temperatures normally reach around 140 degrees Fahrenheit, but can sometimes spike out of control. For example, about 10 years ago at the Bridgeton landfill near St. Louis, the heat from methane buildup reached an astonishing 260 degrees Fahrenheit. An underground fire broke out, damaging the leachate pipes, and burning waste released toxic fumes into the surrounding area. Something similar has been happening for 3 years at the Chiquita Canyon landfill in California. Such fires are impossible to extinguish because putting them out would mean digging up the entire landfill, peeling back layer by layer, and doing so would cause even more environmental damage. Instead, they must be left to burn out on their own, which could take years. No one knows how many more years it will take, but in a way, that's what landfills are essentially meant for. Don't touch it. Don't solve it. Just let it rot underground. Although there are other waste management technologies like incineration or composting, burying trash remains the #1 large-scale solution. The thing is, it's the cheapest option. A waste-to-energy incineration plant is a huge, expensive facility that requires massive investment. To make it financially viable, the fee for incinerating 1 ton of trash would need to be 2 or even 3 times higher than the cost of burying it at the landfill. That's why, to this day, landfills remain the primary destination for our waste. So now we understand the inner workings of a landfill. But how much space do they actually occupy? State of Delaware. That's the answer. Wait, what? Exactly. If you put all the US landfills side by side, they'd cover an area the size of Delaware. Actually, even a bit larger. Delaware spans less than 2,500 square miles, while the combined surface area of all landfills is around 2,810 square miles. And that's just the 2,600 currently operating landfills. There are also more than 10,000 closed ones. An average US landfill spans about 700 acres. That's how large the Puente Hills landfill in Los Angeles was. It operated from 1957 to 2013 and held the title of the largest landfill in the US for many years. Every day, it received around 13,000 tons of waste and eventually reached a height of 500 feet, comparable to the Fox Plaza and Constellation Place skyscrapers. Over the past 3 decades, the number of landfills in the US has significantly decreased, while their individual sizes have grown dramatically. What used to be a record-breaking landfill like Puente Hills is now just an average-sized modern landfill. The largest landfill today, not only in the US, but in the entire world, is the Apex Regional Landfill in Nevada, opened in 1993. It spans 2,200 acres, 3 times the size of Puente Hills, and 2.5 times bigger than New York City's Central Park. And that comparison to Central Park isn't random. In fact, there's a surprisingly close connection between landfills and parks. You'll learn more about that in a moment. Remember the Monte Testaccio Hill in Rome? The one that turned out to be entirely made of broken Roman pottery upon closer inspection? Well, America has thousands of similar hills. Of course, there are no ancient pottery shards in these ones, but you might as well find a piece of a plate your parents broke when they were kids. As you drive past a picturesque hill and snap pictures from your car window, you might never guess that beneath the blooming trees and bushes lie thousands of tons of garbage dumped half a century ago. So, how does a landfill become a scenic hill? Every landfill has a maximum design capacity, the total volume of waste it can hold. Once this capacity is reached, the site must be closed. Depending on the size of the site and the rate of incoming waste, this could take 20, 30, or even 50 years. From the outside, it may look like the landfill's life is over, but in reality, it isn't. As we've learned, methane gas continues to form inside the layers of waste, and bacteria that produce it don't care if the site is open or closed. So the degassing process must continue for decades after a landfill shuts down. In that sense, a landfill is like a living organism, and it needs to be monitored for at least 30 years, possibly up to 100. Even after we're gone and our grandchildren retire, the landfill will still be alive beneath the layers of clay and plastic. Dozens of sensors will keep tracking the changes in pressure and temperature, as well as gas emissions, soil and water quality, and many other parameters to ensure the closed landfill remains safe for the environment. While the hidden life of trash continues deep within this hill, a new life begins on the surface, one that's far more pleasant. Here's the famous American memorial, Mount Rushmore. But did you know there's also a Mount Trashmore? It might not be as impressive or imposing, but look at how beautiful a former landfill can be. Yes, as the name suggests, Mount Trashmore Park was built on top of a landfill, way back in 1974. Today, it's the most popular recreation spot in Virginia Beach. Spanning 165 acres, it offers volleyball courts, walking trails, picnic shelters, all sitting atop thousands of tons of waste. And this is not a one-off case when a picturesque park was built on a former landfill. In the early 1990s, Cesar Chavez Park in Berkeley, California, and Thomas W. Danahy Park in Cambridge, Massachusetts, opened on former landfills. There's even an earlier example, Flushing Meadows Corona Park in New York City. In the first half of the 20th century, the area was used as an ash dump. By 1939, it had been transformed for the World's Fair. Right now, the construction of Fresh Kills Park on Staten Island in New York is underway. The park is being built on the site of the former Fresh Kills landfill, which operated from 1947 to 2001. Since 2008, the 2,200-acre park has been under development. Once completed, it will be the second largest park in New York City, 3 times the size of Central Park. However, turning former landfills into parks only makes sense when they are near populated areas. More often than not, landfills are located far from residential zones, and few would travel just to visit a remote park. So, what can be done with these lands when they can't be built on and no one's around to enjoy them? This is your answer. Closed landfills are ideal sites for solar power plants. Solar panels require vast amounts of space that could otherwise be used for construction or other purposes. So, to avoid taking up valuable land, placing panels on unusable areas like old landfills makes perfect sense. The largest such project is Mount Olive, which opened in 2023 on the site of the former Comeville North landfill, about 40 miles from New York City. This solar farm has a capacity of over 25 megawatts. That's modest compared to giant power plants. For example, Hoover Dam generates about 2,000 megawatts, enough to power a major city, but 25 megawatts can supply a small town with electricity. New Jersey is especially active in developing solar energy projects on former landfills. For example, Kearney Point and Pennsauken landfill supply energy to the suburbs of New York and Philadelphia. Similar projects have also been implemented in Georgia and Wisconsin. But it's not only solar panels that can generate electricity from landfills. Sometimes, the landfills themselves can do that. As we've already discussed, methane is a dangerous greenhouse gas. It might seem like an absolute evil to be eliminated at all costs. But in reality, methane has valuable thermal properties, which make it a useful energy source. Take California's Altamont landfill, for example. It's specifically designed to capture methane, which is then used as fuel for a local power plant. There are now hundreds of similar landfill-to-energy facilities operating across the US, so it's quite possible that at this very moment, your phone or laptop is charging thanks to trash. Even after closure, landfills continue to produce methane, which can still be harnessed for energy. For instance, one of the largest suppliers of landfill methane for electricity is the Seneca Meadows landfill in New York. It has a capacity of 18 megawatts, which is enough to power 15,000 homes. At first glance, using methane for energy seems like a win-win. Not only do we get rid of a harmful greenhouse gas, but we also produce useful electricity. However, there are serious downsides to such projects. First, the efficiency of landfill methane power plants is very low, only 20 to 25%. In fact, methane accounts for just 0.3% of total electricity production in the US. Second, methane still escapes into the atmosphere during the capture process. And let us remind you that it's 28 times more harmful than CO2. That's why landfill methane facilities can't be classified as green energy. If anything, they fall under greenwashing, the practice of making something appear eco-friendly when it's mostly a marketing tactic. Still, even if the environmental benefits of landfill energy are debatable, the economic benefits are very real. Some believe there's literal gold buried under all that trash, and not just metaphorically. $114 billion. That's the estimated value buried beneath layers of trash in American landfills, at least according to Travis Wagner, a professor at the University of Southern Maine. And no, we're not talking about a discarded laptop with 1 million bitcoins, but actual gold. Or more precisely, not just gold, but a wide range of precious metals contained in trash. These metals are being sought by EcoMaine, a company that extracts valuable resources from landfills in southern Maine. Since 2011, they've managed to recover 27,000 tons of metals worth over $2 million. EcoMaine represents a relatively new industry of landfill mining. The name might conjure images of old-time prospectors heading to Alaska with shovels in search of gold. Now, imagine them heading to landfills instead. But in reality, there aren't many such adventurers, and landfill mining is more about a complex engineering enterprise rather than simply digging in garbage. In many ways, it resembles conventional waste sorting, but instead of being done at a materials recovery facility, it happens right on the landfill site. This mostly applies to landfills that were closed before the mid-1990s, where all kinds of waste were dumped together. Now, it's time to sort it all out. First, an excavator pulls out large volumes of waste. It's fed through a trommel screen, then put onto conveyor belts where magnets extract metals. Gold is often separated using special chemical solutions. Toxic materials are safely disposed of, while the rest is cleaned, recycled, or used as fuel. But the real economic value isn't just in the recovered materials, but in the freed up space. Opening new landfill sites is expensive and time-consuming. By mining old landfills instead of creating new ones, valuable space can be reclaimed and reused, saving lots of resources. And beyond its practical benefits, landfill mining also serves another purpose. Science. Trash can be studied, and this science is called garbology. Just as heaps of broken pottery provide archaeologists with insights into the Roman Empire, today's landfills reveal much about our modern society, offering useful data for ecologists, sociologists, economists, and marketers. As the saying goes, you are what you throw away. Did you know that each American generates over 800 kilograms of waste annually? Just imagine how much we could learn from that mountain of waste. The US leads the world in waste generated per capita, but when it comes to recycling, the US is not a leader. As mentioned earlier, less than a quarter of waste is recycled. However, one tool is helping the US and the world move closer to a zero-waste future: artificial intelligence. Manual waste sorting is slow and unpleasant, but computer vision systems are already taking on the task. We've already touched on how neural networks can identify types of plastic during sorting, but they can identify so much more about a piece of trash, including shape, size, weight, material, type of packaging, and even its brand and market value. AI-powered robots can recognize over 30 types of objects, and do so several times faster than a human. And we can already see the results. For example, Alameda County Industries managed to reduce labor needs by 59% thanks to robots that sorted 30 million items. Meanwhile, Glacier helped its clients increase revenue by almost $1 million by identifying items that were mistakenly sent to landfills instead of being recycled. Yep, the AI revolution has reached the waste industry too, but that's another story.